I have always found true comfort in right angles. My name is Ilara Vance, and for the last 7 years, my life has been a relentless, beautiful pursuit of the perfect grid. Viridia, the city I help manage, is my masterpiece, a triumph of efficiency over sentimentality. Everything here is accounted for, categorized, and optimized. From the pulse of the hyper-efficient maglev trains to the precise 3-meter spacing of the streetlights, Viridia operates on the undeniable logic of cold, hard numbers. I am a mid-level city planner, and I am the dedicated architect of its monotony. I take immense, quiet pride in it. This afternoon, my personal sanctuary, my perfectly ordered mind, was disturbed by a routine obligation, the final, pre-demolition survey of Sector Delta 7. This sector was one of the last, messy remnants of the old city, a historical blight slated to be replaced by the sleek, profitable megamall complex Anion. The plan was flawless. The building was due to be erased by the end of the week. My only task was to run one last structural integrity scan, log any unexpected subterranean features, and sign the release form. I stepped out of my government-issued electric vehicle, the crisp, silent air of Viridia filling my lungs. The contrast between my meticulously organized life and the chaos of Delta 7 was palpable, and frankly, offensive. The buildings here didn't sit flush with the street, they leaned. Their windows were irregular squares of varying sizes, not the uniform panes mandated by Code 32. And worst of all, there was no predictable flow of pedestrian traffic. People simply wandered. The specific target today was the old municipal library, a towering structure of cracked brick and forgotten stories. It smelled of dust and mildew, an odor I found intellectually irritating. This was the problem with old things, they held on to unnecessary mass memories, useless trinkets, emotional debris. My job was to streamline, to sterilize. Scan complete. My technician's voice crackled through my earpiece. Subsurface is clean, ma'am. One confirmed basement level, structurally sound, ready for the explosives team. I walked through the empty, echoing halls. My footsteps the only sound in the vast silence. I ran my gloved hand over the chipped marble of what had once been a reception desk. It was just a surface, nothing more, yet the city code dictated a final, physical inspection. A pointless formality, but a formality I respect. In the center of the main reading room, where the light used to spill across worn wood, I noticed a subtle discrepancy. My internal sense of geometric balance twitched. A section of the floor, beneath a collapsed stack of discarded shelves, was slightly depressed. It was insignificant, barely a centimeter, but, in my world, a centimeter is an error of magnitude. I signaled the technician to bring a low-frequency sensor. The results were immediate and baffling. Wait, the tech's voice was laced with unprofessional confusion. There's an anomalous space, directly beneath you, ma'am. It doesn't register as a sub-basement. It's an insulated void. Maybe 3 by 5 meters. Completely sealed. Curiosity, a sensation I rarely permitted myself, sharpened my focus. I directed my team to access the space. After 15 minutes of carefully prying away concrete and rusted metal, a gap opened. A short set of stone steps descended into blackness. I descended first. The air below was strangely dry and cool, carrying a faint, earthy scent unlike the city's processed oxygen. It was a room of stark contrasts. Rough-hewn stone walls meeting a perfectly smooth, polished obsidian table in the center. There was nothing else. No books, no files. No furniture. Only one object rested on that black table. It was a map. Not paper, but something like star chart parchment, thick, fibrous, and impossibly old. It was utterly devoid of the clean, parallel lines that defined Viridia. Instead, it showed a chaotic web of glowing, faint silver threads, weaving through strange, circular markers labeled with symbols I didn't recognize. It was not a map of streets, traffic zones, or demolition sites. It was a depiction of something organic, something alive. My immediate, professional thought was to categorize it. Unknown artifact, source of anomalous readings. I reached out, prepared to document the material, the dimensions, and the probable age. The moment my finger brushed the parchment, everything changed. The map didn't just glow. It pulsed, radiating warmth that traveled up my arm and into the core of my chest. For a terrifying, beautiful split second, the sterile silence of the room shattered. I heard it, a flash of faint, vibrant musica, discordant, yet joyful mess of stringed instruments, overlaid with the distant, unmistakable sound of genuine, unrestrained laughter. It was chaotic, unnecessary, and utterly alien to the regulated environment of Viridia. It was the sound of humanity, unchecked. I snatched my hand back, as if burned. The sounds vanished instantly, replaced by the mundane echo of my own sharp breath. My heart, a reliable metronome for the past 3 decades, stuttered once. I stood frozen, my highly trained analytical mind racing and failing to find a logical explanation for the auditory hallucination. It was a technical fault, a localized magnetic anomaly, a residual frequency interference. It had to be. The entire experience was a flaw in the system, and flaws are what I fix. I carefully rolled the map, tucking the glowing parchment, now a dim, cool ember, into my inspection case, next to my perfectly calibrated calibers and my demolition authorization forms. I closed the trap door, sealing the chamber once more. I would file the item under miscellaneous cultural debris and begin my analysis immediately, treating it not as a relic of magic, but as a technical problem to be solved. But as I drove back toward the perfectly ordered grid of the central sector, the map's faint warmth pressed against my side, and I realized, with a chilling sense of professional dread, that this was the first unplanned deviation my life had taken in years. The city, which I had spent my entire adult life mastering, suddenly felt like it was whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. The glowing parchment rested on my workbench, an utterly irritating anomaly, disrupting the flawless order of my private analytical lab. My lab is a space designed for clarity, white surfaces, laser-guided tools, and climate controls set to a precise 18 degrees Celsius. The artifact, however, was defiantly messy. It refused to be categorized. For 2 days, I subjected it to every diagnostic test my considerable government resources allowed. I used CAD software to cross-reference its symbols with historical zoning plans. I applied spectral analysis, searching for pigments or material compositions. I even tried standard radiological scans. The results: negative, baffling, and maddening. The threads weaving across its surface weren't ink. They were lines of faint, internal silver luminescence. The parchment itself defied dating, registering simultaneously as being centuries old and freshly manufactured. The circular markers it displayed corresponded to no known addresses, no recognized utilities, and certainly no approved structures within Viridia's master index. Logically, the thing was an elaborate hoax or a forgotten piece of fantasy art. Emotionally, however, the faint, residual warmth it emitted was beginning to feel like a persistent, internal hum. It's nonsense, I muttered, pushing back from the workbench. The sound of my chair scraping the polished floor like a violation of the silence. I decided to ignore its strange cartography and treat it purely as a physical object. If I couldn't understand what it meant, I could at least understand where it came from. I input the precise spatial coordinates of the library's hidden room. The map, seemingly dormant, subtly flared to life, the silver threads brightening for a fraction of a second. Then, it settled back into a soft glow. But when I looked down, the glowing lines had shifted their focus. They no longer pointed to the library. They now centered on a new, nearby location. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, yet it pulled my attention with the sudden, undeniable force of a gravitational shift. This was not data. This was an invitation. I felt a professional contempt for the entire situation, yet my feet, guided by a strange, new impulse, were already leading me toward the front door. I followed the map that evening, keeping it tucked inside my coat, its warm pressure a strange, illicit secret against my side. It led me away from the pristine, predictable transit corridors I usually utilized. It demanded that I walk, and what was worse, it guided me through forgotten back alleys and dimly lit service routes, the veins of the city my office had spent years trying to pave over. The destination, according to the artifact's new focus point, was the forgotten reservoir. I knew the site. It was a decommissioned public fountain on the border of the Central District. Dry for at least 20 years, marked for removal in the next fiscal quarter. The structure itself was a massive, weathered bowl of dry stone and concrete, currently serving only as a perch for pigeons. I stood before it, feeling ridiculous. I was Elara Vance, highly decorated city planner, obeying a glowing piece of impossible paper. I pulled the artifact out, as I held it up, aligning its faint threads with the surrounding physical reality. The map's glow intensified. Where the fountain stood, the map showed a vibrant, swirling vortex. Driven by a need to prove it wrong, to restore my logical equilibrium, I walked toward the dry basin, and placed my hand firmly on the rough, dusty stone. The touch was immediately answered by a powerful surge of the other sound. The music, the laughter and, this time, it was accompanied by an intense visual flash. For a single, stunning moment, the fountain wasn't dry. It was flowing. Water, but not water, liquid that glowed with a spectrum of electric blue, emerald green, and gold, leaping and arching with joyful abandon. I saw faces, not modern Viridian citizens, but figures dressed in vibrant flowing clothes, laughing as they splashed in the luminous spray. The vision evaporated faster than dew in the sun. I blinked, catching my breath. The fountain was dull, dusty stone again. Looking for something that's supposed to be there, but isn't. The voice startled me, shattering the fragile remnants of my focus. I spun around. Sitting on an overturned milk crate beneath the awning of a closed convenience stall, was an old man. He had a great untamed beard that looked less trimmed than sculpted by the wind. And his eyes, set deep in a web of smiling lines, were startlingly intelligent. He was surrounded by a disorganized heap of items. Polished riverstones, hand-carved wooden animals, and odd bits of colored glass. What I would clinically label unnecessary trinkets. I am merely conducting a structural inspection of the decommissioned water fixture, I replied, my voice snapping back into its official, sterile tone. I quickly tucked the map away. The old man, who introduced himself as Silas, merely smiled, a slow, knowing expression that seemed to crinkle his whole face. You look for what's dead, Miss Planner. But the city remembers what it felt. He picked up a perfectly smooth, dark gray riverstone, turning it in his fingers. This isn't just rock. It was carried here by a memory. You're looking for logic in a place built by yearning. His words, ridiculous as they were, struck an unsettling chord. I wanted to dismiss him as a harmless eccentric, yet he had perfectly summarized my entire, confusing endeavor. I turned to walk away, but Silas's voice stopped me again, softer this time. The map won't give you coordinates, dear. It gives you directions. I retreated to my apartment, rattled. Silas's words, the unsettling visual experience at the fountain, had completely destabilized my analysis. I couldn't file the map. I couldn't discard it. I had to follow the direction. The next morning, I couldn't focus on the daily reports. The map sat on my desk, subtly pulling my gaze. Its threads were focused on one specific marker, glowing a little brighter than the rest, a spiraling symbol labeled Heart's Echo. I knew exactly where that location was. Even without the precise coordinates, it was the site of the former Central District greenhouse, a neglected plot of land that was, this very week, slated to become the foundation for the new municipal parking structure, Gamma, my project. I arrived at the site alone. It wasn't a building. It was a flourishing community garden, hidden behind temporary construction fencing. Citizens who had completely bypassed my efficient system, were clearly cultivating the land, growing wild, chaotic bursts of color, that violated all of Viridia's landscape codes. It was disorganized, beautiful, and utterly, wonderfully illegal. The map thrummed in my hand, vibrating with silent approval. This was the Heart's Echo. It was life where I had planned concrete. I stood there, staring at the vibrantly blooming, law-breaking petals, and felt something sharp and unexpected pierce the armor of my logic. A profound, heavy weight in my chest. If I signed the demolition order, this place would be buried under 10,000 tons of reinforced cement by sundown. I looked down at the map, then at the bright chaotic life before me. And for the first time in years, I knowingly made a decision that had no place on a spreadsheet. I pulled out my official digital tablet, accessed the municipal zoning scheduler, and with a shaky, unauthorized key entry I delayed the parking structure Gamma project indefinitely, citing unforeseen complex subsurface archaeological implications. The consequence would be a formal review, a public reprimand, maybe even suspension. It was a massive, career-jeopardizing risk. Yet, as the warmth of the map surged, echoing the warmth that spread through my own chest, the anxiety was outweighed by an unfamiliar sensation, relief. I had protected the unnecessary. I had chosen feeling over facts. The rigidity of my life had a crack in its foundation, and through it, a chaotic silver light was pouring in. The thrill of insubordination was a foreign, intoxicating poison. My official actions, the reckless, unauthorized delay of parking structure, Goma had immediate, predictable consequences. My inbox was a digital bonfire of demands for explanations. My superior, the ever monochromatic Director Thorne, left 3 voice messages characterized by escalating levels of frozen fury, each one a perfectly measured threat. The professional Alara should have been terrified. The new Alara, holding the still warm parchment, felt strangely vital. The bureaucratic chaos I had unleashed felt, counterintuitively, like freedom. The map had given me a direction, and now, it gave me a purpose. If the city's heart was the wild garden, then what were the silver lines connecting it? Silas's words. The map won't give you coordinates, dear. It gives you directions, echoed in my mind, urging me to abandon the precision I had always worshipped. I spent the next night tracing the glowing threads on foot. They deliberately bypassed the main arteries, avoiding the perfectly lit boulevards and the surveillance grid. They led me down forgotten storm drains, through service tunnels labeled strictly restricted, and into the humid, echoing underpasses that my department had bricked up decades ago, deeming them inefficient pathways. These were the veins of Viridia, and they were pulsating with a low, vibrant life the surface world knew nothing about. The air grew heavier, warmer, and smelled faintly of paint and roasted sugar. Eventually, the map led me to a vast, cavernous space beneath the oldest railway terminal, a terminal long closed and buried under an administrative complex. Here, the silver threads converged, illuminating a sprawling, vibrant spectacle. It was a hidden community. They called themselves the Unseen. They were everything Viridia was designed to eliminate. Disorganized, loud, colorful, and utterly, beautifully alive. Artists used the damp, ancient walls as canvases for murals that seemed to shift in the low light. Musicians played instruments cobbled together from salvaged pipes and broken tech, producing melodies that resonated deep in the stone and in my chest. There were makeshift cafes serving pungent, delicious food that smelled nothing like the standard nutritional paste distributed citywide. Children, unsupervised and laughing, chased small, glowing drones through the air. I stood there, a vision in my tailored gray coat, an alien amidst their vivid chaos. They knew immediately I wasn't one of them. My clothes, my posture, the analytical focus in my eyes, it all screamed the system. A woman approached me. She was dressed in layers of patched, brightly dyed fabric, her arms covered in intricate, looping tattoos that mirrored the silver threads on my map. Her eyes held the deep, knowing intelligence I had only seen before in Silas. She introduced herself simply as Lyra, and she was the keeper of the space. "Welcome to the flaws in the system, planner," she said, her voice smooth but edged with caution. "We've seen your kind before. Usually, they bring demolition crews." I held out the parchment. "I am not here to demolish. I found this." It guided me. Lyra's reaction was profound. She didn't gasp. She exhaled, a long, weary sigh of understanding. She reached out and gently touched the map, and under her fingers, the silver light became golden. "The blueprint," she murmured. "It hasn't pulsed like this in generations. It's a guide to the places we saved, the soul anchors the original planners tried to tear out." She explained that Viridia had not always been the sterile grid I knew. It was designed to be a vibrant, connected city, but a cabal of cold, efficiency-obsessed leaders, the historical predecessors to my current department, had systematically stripped out anything deemed unnecessary: parks, communal art spaces, spontaneous gathering points, anything that fostered unpredictable human emotion. The Unseen were the descendants of the original inhabitants, working underground, using the map to find and protect the few remaining true nodes of life. "The city's true power isn't in its efficiency, Ilara," Lyra said, her gaze steady. "It's in the messy parts you were hired to erase. Your system killed the color." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my professional defense mechanisms rise, fierce and sudden. Order guarantees safety. Efficiency provides for the majority. Chaos is simply a failure of design, I countered. The voice of the old Ilara. The secure, logical Ilara. Lyra simply laughed, a warm, rich sound that seemed to chase away the last vestiges of my anxiety. Order is a cage, dear. Look around. We are safe here because we choose connection over control. The conversation was intellectually bruising, but I couldn't leave. Lyra then directed my attention to the next point on the map, the most prominent symbol yet. A large, spiraling coil labeled the voice. The voice, Lyra explained, is the city's original public frequency. It's an old radio tower, decommissioned 50 years ago, locked down and buried. It used to broadcast nothing but stories, poems, and spontaneous music, the sounds of the city's spirit. They shut it down because it was too loud. I knew the location, the massive blocky edifice of the Administrative Records Archive, built directly over the old tower's foundation. The map indicated the structure was still down there, intact. We need to reactivate it, Lyra stated simply. We need to broadcast the feeling again. But the access panel, she tapped the map, doesn't open with a key or a number. It was sealed with an emotional resonance lock. It requires a code that relates not to data, but to a profound, shared feeling. The task was dizzying. I, Ilara Vance, who measured human needs in square footage and energy consumption, was now being asked to find an emotional key to unlock a legendary radio tower to save a secret garden. My rational mind was screaming for the escape route, but the warmth of the map in my coat, and the vibrant chaos surrounding me, whispered of a challenge more vital than any professional success I had ever known. I was deep in the uncharted lines, and for the first time, I wasn't worried about finding my way back to the grid. I was worried about losing the gold. The urgency to activate the voice was absolute, yet the emotional resonance lock remained an impenetrable barrier. After my exhilarating encounter with the unseen, I felt charged with a strange new energy, a mix of adrenaline and moral panic. I had committed professional treason, but I was defending the one true, vibrant thing I had discovered in years. Lyra and the others trusted me, a planner, to find the feeling that would awaken the tower. I returned to my lab, determined to solve the emotional lock with logic. I tried everything. I devised algorithms to categorize human affect, breaking down concepts like hope and courage into their constituent neurological responses. I sought out databases of historical cultural movements, looking for the defining sentiment of the old city. I tried to think of a profoundly shared feeling: collective pride, civic duty, loyalty to the grid. Each time I touched the control panel's access plate with an intention rooted in professional duty or forced sentiment, the parchment, which I had brought with me, reacted violently. It didn't just dim. The silver lines turned to a brittle, sickly white, flickering like a faulty fluorescent bulb. A profound chill would spread from my fingertips, neutralizing the warmth I had grown accustomed to. The blueprint was rejecting my synthetic attempts at empathy. It demanded something genuine, something excavated from the deep interior of my own rigid self. My attempt to approach the problem clinically was useless, and the rejection by the glowing artifact was painfully personal. It wasn't just a technical failure. It felt like a moral judgment. The blueprint, now a silent, persistent mirror, reflected the cold, hard fact of my isolated life. I, Ilara Vance, had no profound, shared feelings to offer. I was an island of efficiency, utterly alone. The realization forced me to confront the source of my isolation. Why the suffocating obsession with the grid? Why the professional contempt for anything messy or unpredictable? The parchment, sensing my internal distress, began to pulse again, but this time, the light was faint and insistent, drawing my attention to one specific, nearly erased spot on its surface. It was a location in the very heart of the city, a wide, open plaza I had helped design 4 years ago, but the blueprint depicted something else entirely. It depicted my childhood street. My breath hitched. I knew exactly where that street was, or rather, where it used to be. It was the site of the great zoning collapse from 2 decades ago. The catastrophic structural failure that had wiped out an entire neighborhood, including my family's brownstone apartment. It was the disaster that had reduced my parents to husks of despair and cost them everything. It was the reason I had dedicated my entire adult life to ensuring such a flaw could never happen again. My pursuit of order was not a professional choice. It was a deeply buried shield against the pain of that devastating loss of control. Driven by a terrible, relentless compulsion, I went to the plaza. It was wide and empty, designed for sterile public ceremonies. Standing there, the cold, smooth pavement beneath my boots, the parchment artifact warmed in my hand, burning away the surface layers of my manufactured calm. The air seemed too thin, and the present receded. I was pulled back to the past, experiencing the memory not as a distant event, but as a fresh, searing wave of regret and fear. I stood on the spot where our brownstone's front stoop had been. The memory was agonizing. My father's face, etched with failure. My mother's quiet, defeated tears. The sudden, terrifying realization that the world wasn't a predictable place after all. My childhood trauma had been the foundational block of my career. Control, control, control. The blueprint in my grip was cold again. Fear was not the key. Grief was not the key. The lock demanded something positive, something unburdened, something before. I closed my eyes and forced myself to reach further back, beyond the smoke and the shouting, beyond the endless meetings and the sterile reports. I pushed past the pain and the defensive walls I had built brick by logical brick. And then, it surfaced, a tiny, dazzling sliver of light from the forgotten archive of my mind. I was maybe 6 years old. It was a summer evening, and the neighborhood was still whole. My father had just finished building me a ridiculously large, lopsided kite. We were in the small, chaotic community park. A structure immediately condemned and bulldozed after the collapse. And the kite, impossibly, caught a sudden, strong gust of wind. It soared high, pulling the string so hard, my small hands almost let go. I remember throwing my head back, looking up at the tiny, brilliant speck against the fading blue sky, feeling the grass between my toes and the absolute, perfect, unadulterated joy of letting go. A feeling utterly divorced from caution, failure, or fear. It was pure, weightless exhilaration. That was the moment. The profound feeling. The emotional key. The parchment in my hand erupted with a soft, steady golden light. It was confirmation. The code wasn't a concept like love or hope. It was the personal, specific memory of the moment I felt truly free. I immediately sought out Silas. He was at his usual post, surrounded by his beautiful, unnecessary trinkets. I sat beside him on the crate, suddenly unable to bear the weight of the memory alone. For the first time, I allowed myself to be truly vulnerable with another person. I didn't give him data. I gave him the memory, speaking quickly, urgently, describing the kite, the wind, and the terrifying, beautiful freedom. Silas listened, his expression never changing, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the city's distant lights. When I finished, the silence was heavy, but not judgmental. "You remembered your breath," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "You have spent a lifetime holding it, Ilara. The city needs the breath you remember, not the walls you built. Trust the feeling. It's the only logic that matters down there. His simple validation dissolved the last of my professional reserve. I stood up, the blueprint pulsing steadily in my coat pocket, radiating that golden warmth. I wasn't just a planner anymore, I was a key holder. I had faced the origin of my isolation, and now, armed with the terrifying memory of pure joy, I was ready to face the voice. The logic of the impossible had finally conquered the logic of the concrete. The golden warmth of the map, my emotional blueprint, was swiftly replaced by a spike of freezing dread. I was preparing to meet Lyra and the unseen near the Administrative Records Archive when the message arrived. It was an encrypted, unauthorized forward from a former colleague, a nervous analyst still trapped in the machinery of city planning. The subject line was minimal: Delta 7, clearance immediate execution. The attachment was the demolition order for the community garden. The heart's echo. My rival, Marcus, the perfectly polished ambition-fueled drone, who viewed my every action as a personal affront to the grid, had moved. He had undoubtedly traced the inexplicable delay of parking structure, Gamma, back to my digital signature. Instead of simply exposing my professional crime, he had decided to deliver a fatal blow, erase the evidence of life. I had fought to protect and expose my weakness simultaneously. The demolition was scheduled for Dononley, 4 hours away. Panic, an emotion I had successfully audited out of my life, surged through me, metallic and bitter. I was terrified not of exposure, but of failure. I had finally found something worth defending, and now, the system I had helped build was closing in to crush it. My carefully placed archaeological delay was being overruled by an emergency executive order, citing unforeseen seismic instability. A flawless bureaucratic lie. I contacted Lyra immediately. Marcus knows, I whispered into the secure comm line. He's fast-tracking the garden's destruction. We have for hours. We must activate the voice now. We met in the darkest part of the city's underground network, near the final access point to the buried radio tower. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the weight of time running out. Lyra looked at me, not with fear, but with a fierce, burning resolve. We knew the risks, planner. Now you must fulfill the promise of the blueprint. The final tunnel was narrower, claustrophobic. It led directly beneath the monolithic Administrative Records Archive, the very symbol of Viridia's suffocating control. We bypassed 3 security measures, simple magnetic locks that succumbed quickly to the rogue access codes I had programmed over the years. My planning skills were finally being used for necessary chaos. We reached the access chamber. It was small, round, and cold, dominated by the tower's base, a dense, coiled mass of antique copper and rusted steel, buzzing with suppressed energy. The emotional lock, a blank obsidian plate built into the base, glowed faintly in the dim light. Before I could reach it, Lyra stopped me, her hand gripping my arm. Wait, you are the key. But you must be certain. If you input the wrong resonance, the system collapses forever. I nodded, the parchment clutched so tightly my knuckles were white. The noise of the city above the efficient hum of the midnight transport, the endless ventilation felt overwhelming. It was the sound of the machine I was fighting. I closed my eyes and forced the world to silence. I pushed away the present danger, the shame of my professional downfall, and the fear of Marcus's betrayal. I pushed past the 2 decades of self-imposed structure and control. I sought the memory, the moment of unadulterated, 6-year-old joy. I saw the ridiculously large kite, soaring impossibly high, felt the pull of the string trying to lift me off the ground, and heard the wind roaring its perfect, uncontrolled freedom. I felt the pure, beautiful letting go. I placed my hand on the obsidian plate. The connection was instantaneous and overwhelming. It wasn't just a key. It was a circuit. The memory surged from my core. A wave of golden light that flowed from my palm into the cold stone. The tower base roared to life. The antique copper coils vibrated, and a deep, sonorous hum resonated through the chamber, vibrating not just the stone, but my very bones. The lock accepted the code. The tower, the voice, was activated. But instead of a signal, it released a pulse. A wave of shimmering, warm energy, perfectly silent, but intensely felt. It shot up through the hidden foundation, through the concrete and steel of the administrative records archive above, and burst into the city. I stumbled back, tears I hadn't realized I was holding, blurring my vision. The energy was exhilarating and exhausting, the physical manifestation of 2 decades of suppressed joy. "Look," Lyra whispered, pointing up toward the grate leading to the surface world. I forced myself to look. Nothing was visibly altered. The streets weren't suddenly green, the buildings hadn't softened. But the light, the harsh, cold, uniform light of Viridio was different. It seemed to have gained depth, a subtle, almost imperceptible warmth. And the sound of the city had changed. The aggressive hum of the machine hadn't stopped, but now, layered beneath it, was a new, faint resonance. It was the echo of the kite, the sound of letting go. In the distance, I heard the faint, distinct sound of heavy machinery slowing down, then stopping. The demolition crew, already en route to the Heart's Echo Garden, had stalled. They hadn't heard a command. They had felt an instruction. The broadcast wasn't data. It was feeling. I looked at the blueprint, which now glowed with a steady, permanent gold. The city was still my rigid grid, but the circuits had been reconnected. The soul of Viridia, buried for 50 years, was breathing again because I, Ilara Vance, had finally learned to breathe, too. The war for the city had just begun, and I had fired the first, most dangerous shot, a blast of pure, unbridled joy. The silence after the activation was heavier, more profound than any I had ever experienced in Viridia. It was a listening silence. Lyra and I climbed back through the forgotten tunnels, leaving the voice humming its low, resonant frequency beneath the monolithic administration building. Dawn was breaking, not with the typical harsh, white glare of the automated lighting, but with a soft, diffused gold. The first, tangible consequence was immediate, and deeply satisfying. When we reached the surface, near the Heart's Echo Garden, the demolition crew was standing still. They weren't moving, weren't talking. They were simply looking at the wild blooms of the garden, a posture of quiet contemplation that no amount of bureaucratic red tape could ever have achieved. The heavy machinery sat idle, inert, the sheer, aggressive noise of its engine replaced by a gentle, steady vibration in the air. The feeling had reached them, bypassing their orders, touching the messy, human parts of their minds. My career, predictably, imploded before noon. Director Thorne, livid and purple-faced, bypassed the usual formal review. He presented me with a termination notice based on multiple high-level security breaches, unauthorized infrastructure changes, and, most damningly, gross professional misconduct stemming from sentimental interference. The words "sentimental interference" that once would have crushed me now felt like a badge of honor. I stood in Thorne's sterile office, the final vestiges of my old life crumbling around me. Marcus, smirking from the corner, looked smugly triumphant, already calculating how quickly he could claim my vacant post. But the smugness faded when I simply smiled at him. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue the legalities. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the city I had tried to control and saw not an efficient machine, but a sleeping giant that was just beginning to stir. "Your order, Director," I said calmly. My voice steady. Was the sickness. I merely provided the cure. You can't build a city entirely out of fear. And you can't manage a heart with a spreadsheet. I walked out without looking back, shedding the perfectly tailored gray coat of my isolation as I left the building. The freedom was intoxicating, but overwhelming. For 2 decades, my identity had been defined by the logical constraints of my job. Now, I was adrift, armed only with a magical blueprint and a sudden, sharp clarity about what was truly important. I sought out Silas at the end of the day. He was sitting in the newly saved community garden, sipping a strong, pungent tea, surrounded by members of the unseen, who were now openly working the soil, their faces uplifted toward the softer light. They were still illegal, but they were visible. "They're not stopping the construction," Lyra explained, pointing to the halted crew. "They're just waiting. They need a new plan, Ilara. A new blueprint." I realized then, my purpose wasn't to join the resistance, to become an anarchist, or to live outside the walls. My purpose was to be the bridge. One possessed the unique, terrible knowledge of the grid, the weak points, the necessary compromises, the secret pathways of regulation. I was the only person who understood both the language of the concrete and the resonance of the gold. "The demolition crew is stalled because their plan is flawed," I stated, the old professional confidence returning, but fueled by a new, richer source. "We don't need to fight the system. We need to redirect its immense energy. The grid is powerful, but it's blind. We need to give it sight." My new mission became clear. I would use my planning expertise, guided by the organic chaos of the blueprint, to introduce necessary flaws into the system. Not to destroy Viridia, but to heal it. We began working on a counter-proposal immediately, mapping out the true energy lines of the city, the routes of connection, the nodes of joy, the forgotten spaces where people could simply be. I looked down at the parchment blueprint, which rested permanently on the obsidian table. Lyra and I had moved into the garden's central shed. It was no longer a frantic signal of the past. It was a steady, warm source of light. The lines were defined, not rigid, and they showed a beautiful, complex network that incorporated both the ancient energy sources and the modern infrastructure. It was the original design, perfected by 2 decades of resilience. I realized the map wasn't just showing me forgotten landmarks. It was showing me the blueprints for a possible future. I was still Ilara Vance, the planner. But now, I planned for connection, not control. I designed for life, not logic. I had traded the flawless, suffocating certainty of the grid for the messy, exhilarating promise of the wind. My city is still full of concrete, and the shadows of the old system remain vast. But now, I know how to make it breathe. And in the breathing, in the collective chaotic sound of a city remembering its own joy, I finally found a profound, shared feeling of my own purpose. A beautiful, unstoppable purpose. I had truly let go, and the fall was glorious.